Dr. Dawn, welcome to the Child Psych podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you. I know that we've been trying to put this in place for a little while, so today is the day.
Yes.
Dr. Dawn, my history with you, even though you probably didn't know who I was initially, my history with you is that when I first started clinical practice after I became registered, your book, What to Do When Children Worry Too Much, was one that I used all of the time. What I loved so much about your work is that it really seemed to connect with kids and empower them on how to move forward with really difficult things in their world. And I don't often use books. I often stay away from books that might feel like teaching to kids, but that's not my experience of your work at all. It's incredibly empowering and incredibly connecting with kids.
Well, thank you. I love hearing that. I see both the challenge and the pleasure of writing as trying to capture what children actually say and the way they think. And I do try to teach children in a way that makes them feel good about themselves, makes them feel hopeful. And so it's nice for me to hear that works, that I'm successful with that.
Absolutely. And that you were pivotal here in Edmonton, Alberta, in my own practice.
Yes.
So thank you for that. You do have a new series called Dr. Dawn's Mini Books About Mighty Fears. And what I love about this specific series is that you have taken different topics. So children who worry about vomiting, children who have a fear of animals, children who have fears related to health. And you've really looked at each thing individually and looked at how we help kids. And I think children who worry about these sort of things feel really validated by having an entire book that goes, actually, you're not by yourself. There are other kids who struggle with this.
Yes, it's interesting. One of the things I love about working with anxious children is that there is kind of a one size fits all set of techniques. It's the same thing that you do. You do exposure for anxiety, regardless of what a child is feeling anxious about, for the most part. But it's when you're teaching exposure, it's hard for children and parents to figure out how to apply those techniques to their situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so this new series grew out of that realization that people were having some trouble thinking about, okay, I understand that I need to face my fears, or I understand I need to step towards the things that are making me nervous. But how do I do that? Especially when there's something where there actually is some danger. And that's a place where people often get confused. They think that exposure means kind of throwing a child into the very situation that they're afraid of. But that's not what it means. It means exposing children to the possibility of something going wrong, or of feeling unsure in some way, and helping them learn to manage their uncertainty, their trepidation, and to move gradually towards the things that they fear. And so these books kind of break that down related to common specific things that make children feel nervous.
Beautiful. And that's exactly what I want to talk to you today about is exposure, because I think so often I have two little ones myself. As parents, we want to protect our child. So we go,
Absolutely.
it's okay, come here, mommy will sleep with you tonight, or it's okay, you can stay home with me. But really what we need to be doing for our children is quite the opposite.
Right. Yeah. Anyone who has any experience with anxiety, and that's most of us, right? Everybody has felt anxious sometimes, knows that anxiety is really uncomfortable. And when you're feeling anxious, you want nothing more than to make that feeling go away.
Mm-hmm.
And the fastest way to make anxiety go away is to accommodate it. Meaning, when you have a child, to provide reassurance, to allow them to avoid the thing that's making them nervous, to take care of whatever it is that they're seeing as a problem. We as parents and adults tend to overly accommodate anxiety because we're trying to provide relief, which is understandable, and that comes from a place of love for our children. We don't want them to be suffering, but as you said, accommodation has major problems because it quiets the anxiety in the moment while strengthening it in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And so both parents and children, I think, can be helped to learn first what accommodation is so that, they can identify, they have an understanding of it, and then what to do instead. We
Mm-hmm.
can't just tell parents, don't do this, don't do that. We have to tell them what they can do that's still empathic and supportive of their child without accommodating the anxiety itself.
Lovely. So let's go right there. Can we go to a specific example? One of your books that I have here with me, Facing Mighty Fears About Health. I've noticed in my own clinical practice that since COVID, since the pandemic, that fears around health have really gone up clinically. So I'm seeing lots of children come in who are really worried about a number of different health related issues. So they feel a pain in their chest, they feel as if they constantly have a fever. How do parents help children who are struggling with health anxiety?
Yeah. So it's not unusual for anxiety to piggyback onto a realistic fear, right? So kids might notice their heart beating quickly. And if they have a relative that's had a heart attack, they worry that their heart beating means that they're going to have a heart attack. Or kids might swallow and kind of perceive a feeling in their throat and they worry that they're going to choke. And so the anxiety kind of magnifies normal and understandable fears.
Mm,
And certainly with the onset of the pandemic, kids got messages from all around them that there are germs, that those germs are dangerous, that they can make you sick, that COVID is serious, that we have to be careful about being around other people. So kids were getting all kinds of messages about the dangers around them, kind of unseen dangers around them, and understandably felt nervous about that. The problem that happens with anxiety is that there begins to be a mismatch between the level of danger that a child is in and the level of fear that they're feeling. And so we want to kind of right size that. We want kids to be cautious in healthy ways without being anxious in kind of unhealthy or unnecessary ways. So one of the things that parents can do is to talk to children some about the alarm system in their brains. And even as young as about age 5 or 6, we can begin talking to kids about how their brain works, that there's a place within their brain that's always on the lookout for things that might hurt them, for possible danger. We want to normalize that and talk about the fact that it's a good thing that we have that part of our brain. And that part of our brain, when it thinks that there might be a problem, when it thinks that we might be in danger, it sets off an alarm. And when that alarm goes off, we feel afraid. And that's our brain system working exactly as it should. But
mhm,
sometimes the alarm makes a mistake. So sometimes we get that internal alarm when we're not actually in danger. And so we need to learn how to tell the difference between a real danger and a false alarm. And I think, we can use the analogy of a smoke detector, which is something that kids have experience with and can relate to. But we wanted to give an explanation like that to kind of set the groundwork, because we're going to then add on to that by talking to kids about how to know whether or not to trust that brain alarm and what you can do when your brain alarm is going off, but chances are good it's a false alarm. Because there's no difference in the internal experience of a false alarm versus an actual danger. It feels the same internally, right? So you
mhm.
can't distinguish between them that way.
So, Dr. Dawn, I read your book with my 6-year-old, and she was feeling very anxious about going to school. And because we had just read about the amygdala in your wonderful book, um, and we were able to talk about the smoke detector. And all I said to her before she went to school was, "Is this a real fire or is it burnt toast?"
Mm-hmm.
And she looked at me and she said, "Mum, it's burnt toast." And I gave her a hug, and
Excellent.
off she went to school. It was just such a beautiful way for us to talk about actually a very big topic.
Yes, that's fantastic. And being able to develop that kind of shorthand with a child is really important so that you as a parent don't feel like you're constantly needing to kind of re-explain or lecture. And it also, if you're trying to encourage your child to step into a situation that makes them feel nervous, it allows you to be an ally with your child, rather than to be in what feels to a child like an adversarial position, like you're trying to make them do something that they're not ready to do, because
Mm-hmm.
you're able to fall back on an explanation that you've given that makes sense to them. You can help your child re-access that, and that helps them move forward. So
Beautiful.
that's a lovely example.
I love it. And I think when kids are empowered, so when we teach them about the alarm system in their body, they understand what's happening to them. And I think for some reason, as adults, we tend to shy a little bit away from really explaining to children what happens. But then they can go, okay, this is what's happening in my body, and I'm in control of it instead
Mhm.
of my body being in control of me.
Right. Yeah, I think parents are often concerned about giving their child the message that there's something wrong with them. And kids often ask, is there something wrong with me? But it's a mistake to just answer that question with a blanket no, because anxious children know that there's something different. They know that they have more trouble doing things than other kids do. So we don't want to say there's something broken. That's not true, really. But we do want to say something like, your alarm is too finely tuned, or your alarm is going off when there is no danger. And importantly, there are things that you can do to correct your alarm. There are things you can do
Mm-hmm.
to learn how to tell the difference between a real danger and a false alarm. And so, yeah, I think it is important to explain what's going on internally, to acknowledge that there is something happening that's unpleasant or difficult, and here are the steps we can take to turn it around.
Beautiful. So they're turning it around. How do we help our children to quieten that alarm? So if we're looking again at something like health anxiety.
Yeah. So there are two things to think about. One is quieting the alarm in the moment, and the other is how do we quiet the alarm in a way that is going to make it less likely to go off again in the future. Those are two different things, right? So the things that quiet the alarm in the moment, well, the first thing is accommodation, but we don't want to do that. The second thing is teaching kids to do something like take some breaths, or to talk to themselves and say something to themselves like, this is my amygdala, it might be a false alarm. So we want to teach kids to have an immediate kind of response that does something that begins to bring down the temperature for them a little bit, right? But that's not the end of the story. Because if children take some breaths and then they still avoid the thing they're afraid of, that doesn't really accomplish anything. So
Mm-hmm.
we do need to teach children to move towards those things that are making them feel unsure or afraid. So if you think about it, there's something that I call a safety behavior. And a safety behavior is a behavior that a child leans on to try to protect themselves from the things that they think are dangerous. So a child who's afraid of germs might avoid touching doorknobs, or using anything that other people have used. They might want their temperature taken often. They might not want to go to school. Those are all safety behaviors, because they're done in an attempt to protect from danger.
Mm-hmm.
As long as a child is doing those safety behaviors, they're left with the idea that they're necessary, because they do one of those behaviors and the thing that they fear didn't happen. And then they think, whew, good thing I didn't touch a doorknob, or I didn't go to school. That's why I stayed healthy. That's why I didn't
Mm-hmm.
get sick. When really they weren't in danger to begin with. So, a really important step for parents and children is to recognize what those safety behaviors are and to chip away at them, to begin to undo or challenge or help a child move beyond those safety behaviors. That's what
Mm-hmm.
exposure is. And that's an absolutely necessary piece to do the kind of rewiring and correcting that's necessary in the brain to break kids out of this loop.
Mm-hmm. So if your child wants to take their temperature, so they're like, oh, I can feel that alarm going off, it's beeping all over my body, quick, take my temperature. What is the parent's response?
Right. So a parent can say, sounds like you're having an amygdala alarm, or that's like that smoke alarm we talked about. When we take your temperature, it's kind of like we're feeding your worry, or we're keeping that alarm misfiring. So we're not going to take your temperature. We're just going to wait and see what happens, right? If you really are sick, that'll become more obvious. And if you're not sick, then we'll know it was a false alarm. One of the things that's really, really hard for anxious children is uncertainty, right? So they want to know for sure that the thing that they're fearing isn't going to happen. And that's something that we can talk to kids about directly, that their worry wants them to be sure, but we don't need to be sure about things. We can make good guesses, and then we can carry on. So parents need to be careful about kind of falling into a trap of trying to offer certainty. And for something like a child who's repeatedly wanting to take their temperature, you might start out by saying, let's start out by taking your temperature one time a day. You can pick when that time is, right? And if a child first thing in the morning is feeling anxious and they want to take their temperature, a parent can say, I think that's your worry alarm. Remember, you can do one temperature check a day. Do you want right now to be your time, or do you want to save it in case you get the worry again and you feel like you need it even more later in the day? And kids can actually make decisions about that. Many anxious children will say, I want to take it right now. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you're doing a once a day thing, you would allow the child to take their temperature right then. If it's normal, chances are good it's going to be. A parent can say something like, looks like that was a false alarm. And then later in the day, if the child is anxious again and wants to take their temperature again, the parent can say, I'm sorry, you've had your one time today. We need to wait till tomorrow to take your temperature again.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And a child might be upset about that, understandably, right? If you take away a safety behavior, a child is going to feel anxious, but that's a time that a parent can be empathic, right? I know that your worry is making you feel like, you really might be sick this time. I know it seems like I'm being mean. I want you to remember that each time we listen to your worry and we obey it, we're actually making it stronger. And so, I'm going to help you to not do that. So a parent can be empathic. And if a child's angry, they're angry. You need to kind of tolerate that, and just help support your child and try to move on from it.
Beautiful. Yeah. The one that we use in our house in moments when anxiety is high in my daughter is, we just need your brave to be a little bit bigger than your worry right
Mm-hmm.
now. And she
Mm-hmm.
seems to have really responded well to that.
Excellent.
I'm picturing in my own head a child where we say to them, okay, we're not going to use a thermometer. We've used it once already. Mom's here, dad's here, grandma's here, whoever that support person is. That it is likely that at that point, when we don't supply the thermometer, that anxiety is probably going to increase for that child in that moment because they're not getting what makes them feel safe. Do you have a go-to strategy that you use with kiddos who are struggling in the moment when they can't have what they need to soothe that alarm system?
Yeah, there are a couple things I do. One is that I tend to externalize anxiety. So I help children see anxiety kind of like a little creature. I used to conceptualize that as a bully and talk to kids about a worry bully. I actually don't do that anymore.
Mm,
I instead conceptualize worry as either a trickster or as kind of overzealous. Your worry is trying so hard to protect you, but you don't need to be protected right now. And so I'm teaching kids to say, no, thank you, worry, or I've got this worry, rather than kind of yelling at their worry. So when you
mm,
do that externalization and kids are escalating when you're not letting them do their safety behavior, you can talk about, you can tell your worry, no, thank you, or tell your worry, you've got this, or tell your worry, you can check your temperature again tomorrow. So you're kind of helping kids to talk back to their anxiety. And then another thing I tend to do is when I talk to kids about the brain alarm, I talk to them about how when their brain alarm goes off, there are things that they can do to quiet down their brain again or to calm down their brain. And that's breathing and mindfulness kinds of things.
mhm.
Typically, it doesn't work if a child is panicky and just right in the moment for the first time you say, take a breath. That often is not particularly helpful. Kids will say, I am breathing, or that doesn't
I've heard
help.
that.
Right? Yeah. And so breathing is something that you need to practice in advance. But if you work out with your child some breathing activity or mindfulness activity that they've done in advance so they know how to do, and they see that it does help them feel calmer inside. Kids especially benefit from app-based ones because it allows them to kind of engage with the screen, which kids like. And that can help some to calm them down, right? But
Hmm.
there's really nothing you can do to just kind of turn the worry off. And that shouldn't be our goal, because the more we're trying to kind of stamp out the worry and make it go away, the more it has a hold on us. And instead, we want kids to understand that anxiety is kind of like a wave, and we need to learn to ride it out.
Oh,
So,
beautiful.
we can say things like, we need to ride the wave. We can help kids find, let's think about what we can go do while we're riding the wave. Do you want to color? Should we work on a puzzle? Right? Um, so those kinds of techniques I think are helpful.
Mm. I found personally one of the best things in our family is going for a walk together. We don't need to
Mm,
talk about the anxiety. We don't, this is not mom doing a therapy session with you all the way through the forest, but let's
mhm.
just go outside together and
Right.
move our bodies. I
Yes.
find for us that that's been incredibly helpful.
Yes. Yeah. Change of scenery and physical activity are both really helpful.
Hmm. So we stop trying to protect our child from the anxiety, and then we just wait it out. We're patient, and we learn that we actually can really ride that wave.
Right. Right.
Mm.
Another thing that's important is that if we're really trying to help kids to overcome an anxiety issue, an anxiety disorder even, we can think about how are we going to respond when anxiety rears its head, and those are the kinds of things we're talking about right now. But we also need to think about how do we help our child practice these things apart from the anxious moments.
Mhm.
So an important part of exposure is doing intentional practice. So a child, for example, who's worried about choking, to talk about another facet of health anxiety, might avoid certain foods or over chew or take a drink every time they've taken a bite of something. And so, what we want to do is not necessarily wait until our child is feeling nervous. We want to figure out how can we practice some of the things that our child is avoiding doing, even when anxiety isn't in the picture. How do we purposely practice those things to help our child to develop additional skills? And that kind of intentional practice is a really important part of the picture.
Hmm. Hmm. I love it. I think that intentionality also says to children, I believe that you can do this. I think
Hmm.
one of the fallbacks when we accommodate too much is that it inadvertently gives the children that we too don't believe that they can actually do this, that they don't
Right.
have the competency to move forward with the skill.
That's right. It both that they're not competent, and also that anxiety is so terrible. Like the anxiety itself is unbearable. And so I'm going to rescue you. And we don't want to give either of those messages. We want kids to get the message that I believe in you and I know you can do this. And your anxiety is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. And you can ride it out. And I'm going to help you do that.
Hmm. Hmm. Dawn, I know that there are parents out there who are listening in who are going to ask, what if your child just won't engage in the behavior that we're trying to help them with? So if they won't, if they insist on having the thermometer, if there's a complete meltdown, if we don't give them water to keep swallowing, what do we do when our children just aren't ready for exposure?
So, there's someone at Yale University in the United States, Dr. Ellie Leibowitz, who's created a program called the SPACE program, which is an acronym that stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And that program teaches parents how to gently move away from accommodation, even if their child is not cooperating with the changes that the parent is trying to make. And that's basically what parents need to do. They need to focus on their own accommodation and to gradually withdraw it, even if their child isn't willing to, kind of practice these things or get on board with the program. And there's a way for parents to do that kindly. This isn't a tough love, just deal with it kind of approach. You're still using empathy. You're still being supportive of your child, but you're paying attention to what you as parent are doing or aren't doing. And by gradually removing accommodation while you're remaining empathic with your child, you're showing your child that we're not going to let anxiety be the boss of what we're doing. I'm not going to let your anxiety kind of hijack the moment. I'm here, I'm supporting you, but we're not going to let anxiety win here. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
is something powerful that parents can still do.
It's incredibly powerful. So it's almost taking that step back, looking at the whole puzzle and saying, how do I start slowly in a loving way that's still highly connected, but teaches my child that they are capable and I believe in their competency?
Right, right. And
Mm-hmm.
so I often think about exposure. Exposure is basically a desensitization process. And an analogy that's often used is it's like getting used to the cold water in a swimming pool, right? So, what we most want is for children to kind of participate and cooperate with taking steps into the pool so that they can gradually be getting used to that water. What we don't want as parents is to allow our children to get out of the pool entirely, but we also don't want to shove them into the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to find ways as parents to encourage that step. It's okay if it's a tiny, tiny, tiny step, because even those small steps help kids feel braver and more competent, and you can build on those little steps. So the idea is to have small steps and to have them be progressive. You don't take one small step and stop. You want to take a small step and then build on the step. But parents need to, be kind of questioning themselves about, is what I'm doing the equivalent of kind of shoving my child in deeper than they're ready? And we don't want to do that. We want to
Mm-hmm.
take kind of the right size steps and encourage kids to do that as well.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Dr. Dawn, for all of those parents out there who have a child who's struggling, what's a final thought that you would like to leave them with?
It's that even though anxiety feels awful and it snowballs quickly, it is treatable, it is manageable, and there's a lot that children can learn and that parents can do to help children to change their relationship with anxiety. That's really what we're trying to do, change your relationship with anxiety so that you don't immediately capitulate to it. You learn how to kind of question it and push back against it some. And this is doable. And the results are really life changing. So it's well worth the time and effort that it takes to do these things.
Beautiful. And Dr. Dawn, for people who want to find out more about you, where can they go?
So my website would be a good spot. It's dawnhuebnerphd.com. And I describe a video course there and my books. And there's our various free resources for parents, articles and things of that sort. So that's a good spot to go.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Dawn, thank you so much. I know, even listening today, that anxiety feels so much more manageable for our children when we can actually look at it and go, there are things that I can actually do. And I believe that today's podcast has been incredibly empowering. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.